I always thought of myself as a brave kid. After all, I had my fair share of imaginary monsters and ghosts lurking in dark corners and under my bed. But nothing could have prepared me for the day I discovered that real horror was not born of imagination. It all started when I was 12, a time when childhood innocence was still alive but starting to wane. I was sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, carefully taking inventory of my marble collection. I had an array of colors, some sparkling in the light, others dull but still precious to me. As I fiddled with my favorite, the tiger's eye, it rolled away and vanished under my bed. Without a second thought, I reached down, eager to retrieve my treasure. That's when I felt it, something cold, soft, and very much alive. My heart raced as my hand brushed against fingers that felt wrong in every conceivable way. I recoiled, my breath hitching in my throat. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. Fear coursed through me like icy water, but curiosity clawed at the edges of my terror. After a moment of gathering my wits, I lowered myself to the floor again, determination replacing my initial panic. I peered under the bed, my heart thudding. That was when I saw her, the woman with the most intense blue eyes I had ever encountered, even to this day. Her gaze held a strange mix of desperation and pain, piercing through the darkness of my room. Just as quickly, the world around me faded to black, and I lost consciousness. When I awoke, my parents hovered over me, their faces etched with worry. My sister Jill looked particularly alarmed. She told me I had screamed, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house, before collapsing. The concern in their eyes shifted to disbelief as I recounted what I had seen. "There's a body under my bed," I insisted, trembling. My parents exchanged glances. "It was just a bad dream, honey," my mom said, her voice soothing. "You've been under a lot of stress." But I knew what I had felt. I was adamant, pleading with them to understand. Eventually, their annoyance won out, and they reluctantly agreed to check. I sat on the couch, my hands covering my ears, bracing for the screams I was certain would erupt from my mother's mouth. But when they returned, their expressions were far from alarmed. Instead, they wore frowns, scolding me for my prank. It stung, that disbelief. I was lost in my thoughts that evening, avoiding my room, which now felt like a prison. When bedtime rolled around, my father's stern gaze made it clear that protests were futile. With shaky legs and shallow breaths, I stepped into my room, attempting to convince myself it was all a figment of my imagination. The night was a restless one. I tossed and turned, haunted by dreams of those piercing blue eyes. In my nightmares, they were everywhere, staring at me with a haunting intensity. I ran through crowds of faceless people, their hands grasping at me, pleading for help. I awoke with a start, the dark stillness of my room wrapping around me like a shroud. I knew I had to look again. With a shaky resolve, I opened the drawer of my bedside table, my fingers trembling as they grazed the cool metal of my flashlight. After a deep breath, I crawled off my bed and onto the floor, determination coursing through me. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it under the bed. What I saw sent chills down my spine. There she was, the same woman, but this time her body was bloodied and contorted in a way that made my stomach churn. The fear in her expression mirrored my own, and I felt an unshakable bond forming between us. Part of me expected her to lunge at me, a nightmarish specter from my worst fears. But she remained still, a gruesome tableau frozen in time. Silently, I crawled back into bed, tears streaming down my face as I begged the universe. Why me? I couldn't understand why I had been chosen for this torment. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of breakfast wafting through the air. My family was gathered in the kitchen, but my mother's back was turned. It wasn't until my father exclaimed about my puffy eyelids that I became the center of attention. My mother chimed in, making comments about how I looked like a raccoon, while Jill compared my appearance to that of fecal matter. The playful jab earned her a sharp look from our father. "I didn't sleep well," I muttered, gathering my courage to explain. "It's because of the woman under my bed." But my father, quick to dismiss any nonsense, cut me off, reiterating that this prank had to stop. School was my only escape. My best friend Joey listened without hesitation, when I confided in him about my ghostly visitor. "She's gotta be some sort of spirit," he mused, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Joey had always been fascinated by the supernatural, sharing wild theories about ghosts and their connections to the living. "Maybe she needs help," he suggested, his eyes wide with curiosity. "But I felt her hand," I replied, still struggling to comprehend the reality of what I had encountered. "Not all ghosts are what they seem," Joey insisted, confidence radiating from him. We theorized together about what this lost soul wanted from me. Each idea felt far-fetched, yet it was better than believing I was losing my mind. When I returned home from school that day, the silence of the house was deafening. I was alone, with my parents still at work and Jill at cheerleading practice. My usual routine of snacks and TV felt meaningless. My mind was focused on my mission. I approached my bed, summoning all my courage. I had to understand why she chose me. As I dropped to the floor and looked under the bed, my heart sank. The woman's skin had taken on a sickly gray hue, and her once vibrant blue eyes now appeared dim. The stench of decay wafted through the air, overwhelming me. Panic surged through me, and I rushed to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before I heaved. When my sister came home, she was furious. "None of your chores are done. Dad's going to lose it." Her irritation morphed into concern as I explained what I had seen. "You're just imagining things," she said, trying to sound practical. "No, Jill, you don't understand. I can't go in there. It smells awful." Without a word, she walked away, leaving me to confront my own fears alone. My father arrived home shortly after, his demeanor instantly alarming. I tried to explain, desperate for him to believe me. But before I could finish, he dragged me to my room, muttering insults under his breath. When he flung open the door and lifted my bed as if it were made of feathers, I screamed, "No, don't look!" But it was too late. He froze, eyes widening as he took in the scene. "What the hell is this?" he spat, his voice dripping with disbelief. I trembled as he turned to me, the rage on his face palpable. "If you're pulling these pranks, there will be a body under this bed, and it will be yours." The rest of the evening was silent, filled with the weight of unspoken fears. My father's rage hung in the air like a thundercloud. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the dread that my father's anger was more terrifying than the specter beneath my bed. My nights became a haze of sleeplessness, each moment filled with panic, disgust, and sorrow. Days turned into weeks, and I watched in horror as the apparition slowly decayed. The blue in her eyes never faded, yet the rest of her body became skeletal, a grotesque reminder of mortality. I tried to drown out the smell that permeated my room, gagging every time I caught a whiff. Each night my dreams became more vivid. I saw her running through the woods, glancing back with sheer terror in her eyes. I felt her fear, and it resonated deeply within me. Then, one sunny day, I discovered she was gone. In her place lay only a water bottle, a pair of socks, and a baseball mitt. Relief washed over me, but sadness lingered in my heart. I mourned for her. I had witnessed her suffering and the terrible fate that had befallen her. I prayed she had found peace, but the relief was short-lived. My principal, Mr. Cash, summoned me from class with a serious expression. My heart raced as I walked with him to his office, dread pooling in my stomach. I could feel something was very wrong. When I entered the room, my sister's tear-streaked face met mine. "Your father? He did a very bad thing." My mother's voice quivered as she embraced us. "He won't be coming home." The world spun around me. My father had killed someone, a woman far too similar to the ghost I had seen. The weight of the truth crashed down, suffocating me. My father, the man I had feared but loved, had committed a heinous act. Later that night, unable to sleep, I lay in bed with my heart racing. The fear that had once been directed at the woman under my bed morphed into a deep-seated dread for my father. He had crossed a line I could never comprehend. The room felt oppressive, filled with shadows that seemed to whisper my fears. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of the ghostly woman and what she might have wanted. What if she was trying to warn me? What if she had been trapped in my house to show me the darkness of my father's heart? Driven by desperation, I crawled to the edge of my bed and glanced beneath it. In the darkness, I saw nothing but dust bunnies and forgotten toys. But I needed closure. I needed to understand. Why? I whispered into the void. Why did you choose me? What did you want? The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Just as I was about to give up, a flicker of light danced in the corner of my vision. I squinted and then I saw her, a shimmering apparition, her blue eyes glowing with a soft, ethereal light. Help! Her voice was a haunting whisper, barely audible, yet it sent chills down my spine. Help? I echoed, my voice trembling. But how? You're gone! She floated closer, and I felt a cold breeze wrap around me. You must tell. You must speak the truth. Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, feeling a surge of understanding. She hadn't been seeking vengeance. She had been pleading for justice. I could no longer hide behind fear or denial. I needed to break the silence, to confront the truth about my father and his actions. The next day, I gathered my courage and went to the police station. Trembling, I walked up to the desk and explained everything. The woman under my bed, her cries for help, and the growing suspicion of my father's dark secret. The officer's eyes widened, and he listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with the police. They investigated my father's whereabouts and delved into his life, uncovering a web of lies and deceit. As the truth unraveled, I felt a mixture of relief and heartache. The nightmare that had plagued my dreams was no longer a haunting presence in my room. It was the very essence of reality that I had to confront. When the day came for my father's trial, I sat in the courtroom, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. I felt anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. He had betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. As witnesses came forward, recounting their experiences with him, I realized I was no longer just a scared kid. I was a voice for the woman who had reached out from beyond the grave. When my father finally took the stand, his demeanor was different from the man I had known. There was a haunted look in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw the fear that had dwelled within him. As he spoke, I felt a strange connection. He was a broken man, consumed by his own demons. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath, recalling the woman's words. You must speak the truth. My voice trembled but held firm as I recounted my experiences, the fear, the haunting blue eyes, and the cries for help. I didn't seek to absolve my father. I wanted to bring light to the darkness he had created. As I spoke, I noticed a flicker of something in my father's eyes. Maybe it was remorse, or perhaps it was acknowledgement of the pain he had inflicted. Either way, I hoped he understood the gravity of his actions, not just for me, but for the woman who had suffered far too long. The trial concluded, and my father was sentenced to serve time for his crimes. As I walked out of the courthouse, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had faced my fears, confronted my past, and honored the memory of the woman whose suffering had pushed me to act. That night I returned home, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and relief. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to claim me. Just as my eyes began to flutter closed, I felt a gentle breeze caress my cheek. I turned my head to find her. Once again, the woman with the haunting blue eyes stood before me, a warm glow surrounding her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice a soothing balm to my weary heart. And just like that, she vanished into the ether, leaving behind a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. I finally understood that fear doesn't have to bind us. It can also be a catalyst for change. I had faced the darkness, and in doing so, I found my voice. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the woman who had reached out from beneath my bed, but to the truth that had finally set me free. In the bustling city of Crestwood, I managed a small IT company. Layoffs had recently swept through our office like a dark cloud, leaving behind a mix of fear and relief among the remaining employees. My role was clear: keep morale high and ensure productivity remained on track. But I was known for my strict approach, and many of my employees, especially the ones who barely scraped by, didn't like me. I'd made it clear that this was not a place for slackers. The fear of losing their jobs kept most in line, but Clara was an exception. Clara had a knack for slipping through the cracks of my scrutiny. A soft-spoken woman in her late 20s, she had a mysterious aura about her. Her performance was dismal, and despite my repeated warnings, she never seemed to improve. I found myself wishing she had been among those laid off. I didn't care about her struggles. I cared about results. One morning I entered my office, and a chilling sight greeted me. A baby, swaddled and sleeping peacefully on my desk. Confused and terrified, I called the police, my heart racing. How had a baby ended up in my office? Who left it there? The security cameras were down, typical for our company. The police took the baby, but the unsettling image of its tiny face haunted me throughout the day. The next day was no better. I arrived to find a live chicken pecking at the scattered paperwork on my desk. It clucked incessantly, oblivious to my mounting irritation. I let it escape into the wild, but a gnawing hunger struck me, so I grabbed a chicken burger from a nearby deli, hoping to shake off the oddity of the day. My frustration deepened when I realized that the CCTV cameras were still non-operational. Determined to discover the source of this madness, I decided to install hidden cameras in my office. I would catch the culprit, whoever they were, and put an end to these bizarre occurrences. Days turned into weeks, and the absurdities continued. One afternoon, I opened my office door to find a fox sitting on my desk, its eyes wild and bright. Panic flooded my senses as I scrambled to call security. They managed to contain the creature, but I felt a growing sense of dread. This was more than a series of bizarre pranks. It was becoming something sinister. Finally, with my secret cameras up and running, I anxiously reviewed the footage. The grainy video revealed Clara slipping into my office after hours, a twisted grin on her face. She carried a ragged doll, its features disturbingly lifelike. My stomach churned as I watched her place the doll on my desk, whispering inaudible words to it. The fox appeared as if conjured from the shadows, its snarling face matching Clara's eerie smile. I couldn't fathom what I had just witnessed. It was surreal, yet I felt a deep unease crawling under my skin. Clara had crossed a line, and I needed to confront her. That night, I called her into my office. As she entered, her demeanor shifted. No longer timid, she stood before me with an unsettling confidence. I demanded an explanation for her actions, the animals, the baby, the doll. Instead of fear, a sinister satisfaction glimmered in her eyes. "You pushed me too far," she said, her voice low and melodic, as if she were reciting a dark lullaby. "All your cruelty awakened something within me. I can bring forth life from death. I can make the unseen visible." My heart raced, a sense of dread taking hold. What was she saying? I pressed her for clarity, but she merely smiled, her gaze distant, as if she were looking through me. "I've learned to control the energies around me," she continued. "You've made me suffer, and now it's time for you to feel the consequences." As she spoke, the air grew heavy. I felt the walls closing in, the shadows creeping closer. The doll on my desk began to vibrate slightly, its eyes glistening with an unnatural light. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. "Please, Clara, don't do this," I pleaded, but she only chuckled softly, the sound echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting the room into a strobe-like chaos. The doll's eyes widened, and I felt an inexplicable pull towards it, as if it were calling to me. Clara stepped back, her smile broadening, as if she were a conductor orchestrating a horrific symphony. In an instant, I was enveloped by darkness. The room spun, and I felt a cold grip on my throat, choking the words from my lips. Shadows twisted around me, whispering secrets I could not comprehend. I could still hear Clara's laughter, echoing through the void. As the world faded, I saw flashes of distorted images. My employees, the baby, the fox, and then Clara, her face morphing into a monstrous visage, a parody of innocence. Just as I thought I would lose consciousness, the darkness shattered, and I found myself alone in my office. The next morning, I woke up on the floor, the remnants of the chaos scattered around me. The baby was gone, the chicken had vanished, and Clara was nowhere to be found. Only the doll remained, sitting innocently on my desk, grinning with a life of its own. Panic set in. I rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me. The doll's eyes seemed to follow my every move, and I could hear Clara's laughter echoing in my mind, a haunting reminder of my failure to control my surroundings. Days turned into weeks, and I became a mere ghost of my former self. The office fell silent. The employees began to avoid me, sensing the change in the atmosphere. I could hear their hushed whispers, their fearful glances as they passed my office. I was marked by Clara's curse, tethered to her twisted will. And so I remained, a prisoner of my own making, ensnared in a web of horrors I could not escape. The doll became my only companion, its eyes glinting with a promise of something darker, something that whispered of my inevitable fate. In Crestwood, I had lost my power, my control. Clara had won, and the shadows continued to linger, waiting patiently for their next victim. The office remained a haunted place, a chilling reminder of what lay beneath the surface of our mundane lives.